We will continue with Martin. This was a bite of what he had to offer. A continuación vamos a hablar de geopolítica de los alimentos. Recuerdo que cuando estudiaba relaciones internacionales y de repente empecé a trabajar en alimentación, me decían que eso era muy raro, que qué cambio de carrera había hecho, pero en realidad nos estamos dando cuenta de que está estrechamente ligado la alimentación con la política internacional. Y para esto vamos a cubrir el tema con nuestra moderadora de honor, Beatriz Romanos, que es una colaboradora de hace años y además una de las voces líderes en el sector. Así que muchas gracias, Beatriz, por moderar esta mesa redonda. Y también invito al escenario a Paul Newham. Sorry, you're famous, but not that famous. Que ha trabajado durante años con Naciones Unidas, especialmente en lo que respecta el goal número 2, el objetivo 2 de los ODS, el Zero Hunger. Voy a dar la palabra a Beatriz para no quitar tiempo a esta mesa. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Bea, and thank you very much, Martin. Congratulations. It has been an amazing presentation. We will have time to comment some of the points you have commented. And let me introduce also Paul Newham. It's Executive Director of SDG2 Advocacy Hub. You will have the opportunity to explain us a little bit what is that. But let me just frame a little bit the topic. In the latest decade, international competition for natural resources has led to the inclusion of food in the strategic and security considerations both of emerging countries and central countries. And in a world in where 1 in 9 people suffers for chronic hunger and stunting, as you have explained, and the population is expected to increase to more than 9.3 billion people in 2050, where the supply chains are strongly affected by situations such as pandemics, wars, or even pirates or maritime accidents. It's of significant importance to analyze the geopolitical factors that conditions this food supply. So, thank you, Martin and Paul. First, please, can you explain what SDG2 Advocacy Hub is? And after that, I would like to ask, what is your conception or your idea of geopolitica of foods? If you can give us an example.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Martin, for setting up some of the really big issues. When we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, and Martin framed this, within the goals there is a need to not only focus, but also a need to connect. And so the SDG2 Advocacy Hub was set up in 2016, incubated out of the World Food Programme, to connect people working across nutrition, agriculture, food security, and climate adaptation issues in private sector, UN, and civil society, because there is a lot of different issues, and we're only going to actually find solutions if we're working together. And so we operate a network that has a team based around the world. We convene, catalyze, and connect actors to align around priorities, to create narratives, to create champions. And so we have chef networks, campaigns that drive on that. To your question around geopolitics, so we all know whenever we turn on the news, some of the challenges that we face. Our news is being dominated by areas of conflict around our world. We all know about many conflicts that we see regularly in our news. There's also a lot of conflicts that we don't see in our news that are happening behind the scenes, often without the attention that the world should be giving them. And these conflicts, you know, have an impact on food security. It's very hard for a farmer to farm when there is challenges around security in their space, when they have landmines or they have missiles coming or conflict forcing migration. We also see climate change, and climate change is impacting us. There's a lot of news at the moment about the heat wave in North America. I know, talking to others, there's flooding in other parts, or the wrong rains coming at the wrong times, and all of this is happening everywhere. And when we look at it in an isolated way, we see this as individual bad years, bad months, but it's happening all the time. It's happening with greater frequency, and this is something that we need to be recognizing the patterns. We need to be recognizing and acting on the patterns, not just in the short term, but also in medium and long-term plans. And then I think there's a lot of politics going on around trade, around barriers, around protectionism. And this is natural at some level because we're trying to protect, we're trying to invest in the right ways. But what we're seeing since COVID and some of those challenges is it's also having major impacts on the ability for us to move together to solve some of the big solutions. So I think there's those three areas: the conflict, the climate change, and some of the protection around barriers and borders that's going on at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. Martin, from your point of view, which are the three main challenges that we have to address very urgently at the moment?
Well, first of all, I think three are not. I think there are much more. So, I would like to start.
We don't have time for all of them.
No, but I would like to start with something like, if somebody tells you that they have a solution for the problems in the world, don't trust the person. So reality is that we need multiple solutions for many different elements in different contexts. So that's what I think is very important. And that's what it comes back to what Paul was saying, is how do you connect? And for example, this event, which is mainly focusing on Spain, might have international people coming in to look at the bigger context, tells you exactly what's needed, because, Spain has to focus on Spain, but it's part of Europe, and it's also part of the world. It's part of North Africa. So you can see, we need to start to learn to connect and to recognize that problems from different angles are important, and not to discard them immediately, even when you disagree. So I think, working with potential enemies is number one. So, I worked in the UN for a long time, and in the UN, I felt like before I joined the UN, I thought the UN is useless. Then I started to work with the UN, and I realized, wow, it's really complicated because we have so many countries, and you all have to compromise, you have to work together. And of course, that means automatically that it's slow. So that's why, but it's actually important. You can see that what's happening with, in New York and all these. At the same time, you need people, but I repeat myself a bit, who can play between the lines. Mm-hmm. So what Paul is doing, his work, is playing between the lines. And that has impact. It's what KM0 is doing, is exactly the same. So we need to find this idea that if you look at structural problems, we say, oh gosh, forget it. But if that's just the environment, then you have to say, okay, what can we do about it? Juan, with his company, they look at solutions, very interesting solutions. You can translate some of the solutions to smaller groups. Mm-hmm. So there is enough possibility around, and so I refuse to be negative. Mm-hmm. Despite, I can tell you a lot of negative things what's going on in the world. About politics, we know that the politics are difficult at the moment, but I refuse to say that's the end of the world.
Are we implementing the politics that are necessary?
No, absolutely not. And so what I'm saying is, when you have the facts, we get really depressed. Mm-hmm. But forget the facts. No, that's not true. Facts are essential. But that's the beginning of change. Mm. And I think, and we need to be, we don't have a lot of time, no? We have a decade, maybe 2 decades. It's getting really, really serious. Mm-hmm. So let's stop to be negative and start to find solutions, even when we know they are not good enough.
Mm-hmm. You have mentioned politics. Do you think that when we were commenting the panel before starting, we were commenting about the importance of regulation to make things happen, but sometimes maybe we can feel that some regulation maybe have gone too far, too fast, or maybe there's a feeling now that some of the regulation are going to be slowed in some areas, like for example here in Europe. Is that the problem? We have tried to go too far or too fast?
I think one of the challenges is that we still do think in these silos. Yes. We're not thinking in an integrated way. I had somebody ask me the other day what countries around the world have a minister for food, which actually looks at food as a system, not a minister for agriculture, a minister for health, a minister for this, a minister for this, working in separation, but actually integrating and seeing food as something that needs to work across. And I think when it comes to the policies, we need good policies, but these policies need to be solving more than one problem at a time. So we need to be joining up health with climate, with affordability or accessibility. We can't be... It's too urgent at the moment for change that we can't afford the time to actually innovate or to regulate in ways that are only achieving one thing. And so there's this balance between fast and slow that you're asking. I think we need to push forward, but we also need to bring in dialogue similar to what's happening here, similar to what's happening at the city level. And I think what Valencia is doing is brilliant in terms of trying to really integrate conversations and bring the innovators in, but also bring the history in, the history of food here that is deep, and the knowledge from indigenous communities and Spanish heritage into providing and creating the solution of the future. It's the past and the present coming together in different ways. And so for me, I think it's that local and national and global, not local or national or global. It's an and we should be constantly building and I think even the conference theme of people, planet, and prosperity, it's connecting the three in a symbiotic way, and I think this is the solution.
Okay. Yeah. We are mentioning politics and regulations, but what about companies? What about us as citizen humans or consumers? And this is a question of both. What is the role of corporations, startups, and what is the role of citizens in this area? Because geopolitics is not something that it's only the umbrella. There are things that we as citizens we can do, and both. The question is for both.
Let me start and I know that Paul doesn't like me to talk about this, but I am, recently I'm quite upset about the anti-UPF, lobby. We know that ultra-processed food is that it's in the content of that, there are many products which are really bad for your health. We know that. But the term is so broad that it can actually do more harm if you start to use this, because in fact there are elements which are absolutely not harmful in the context of that. Like, for example, the products were developed at World Food Programme together with MSF and other partners on the treatment and prevention of stunting and wasting were considered as ultra-processed food. And they save so many different lives. So it's more complex than that. So my problem is that quite often we are coming up with simple solutions and we say this is bad or this is good. Nothing is bad or good. Actually, the context is very important too in certain elements. Like you need in countries where you have not a lot of fridges, you definitely need other type of foods than when you have a lot of fridges, for example. So what I think it is so incredibly dangerous when groups are saying this is what you need to do. In papers, you talk about scientific papers too, but it is really difficult. You have one popular book about the topic, and everyone believes that book. Mm-hmm. But you look at the literature, for example, it's much more complex. And then they say, well, I don't want to hear this complexity. I want a simple solution. But it's not simple. And so this, I am very worried about this. Because you will see that more and more people will be saying, you need to be a vegan because that's the only way to save the world. Well, veganism just help you at least, not to produce so much meat. But it's not the only solution again. So be aware of complexity and try to find smaller solutions, and all these different solutions will help. Sorry, Paul, but the Drawdown is, I think, a fantastic initiative. And Drawdown said, okay, if you want to save the planet, we need multiple solutions, and some can only contribute 2%, some 5% to the solution.
Yeah.
So look for smaller solutions instead of saying, no, this will help you and save the world. Forget that.
What's your point of view?
Yeah, look, I think this debate is very key. I agree with Martin on the fact that there is a diversity of solutions which are needed. I do think that these debates are helpful because they help people to question things. I think the challenge is that people are looking for simple, almost linear answers. It's this plus this equals the answer. The world doesn't work that way. No. And I think what we've got to look at, and working around the world and talking with people around the world, people sort of say, where does diplomacy fit? Where does global conversations fit? Well, they fit in helping us question ourselves, us look at what are we proposing, and is there another view? So I think we should be pivoting around, and I think this is where your question around what role does business play, I think business should be looking at problems and pivoting around and providing a variety of solutions. And then we have to think about how do we have that narrative and involve people in the discussion.
Yeah.
And that requires language. I mean, ultra-processed food was designed as a way to start a conversation, but people stopped the conversation and just took it as a way of then demonizing things and products and saying that's... And, you know, processing food, we've been doing it for generations. You know, there's lots of food that's processed. And there's nothing wrong with processing. Processing prolongs, it can be very good. But there is also in that category some foods which can also be bad.
Yeah.
And I think this is the challenge, is that we need to become more sophisticated, but we also need to be careful about just treating everyone as consumers. I have a good friend, John Alexander, who talks about the fact we need to bring citizenship into the conversation more. We need to think about how we involve people. And I think business can do this. How do you involve people in the solutions that you're creating? How do you bring them in? How do you help them to articulate what are the answers? What are the ways of explaining this? So for me, I think there's some key things that I think we get almost there on answering, and then we stop. Yeah. And then we argue. Rather than going further, which is listening, engaging, discussing, challenging, seeing those other perspectives.
We have 3 minutes, and I have 2 questions. So it's going to be
Fast.
one for each one. You have to choose which one you want. So here are the 2 questions. We have talked about politics, consumers, and also corporations. But what about stakeholders? Because at the end, food is not only a human right, it's also an asset. And the other question is, what is the role of innovation here? So 1.5 minutes each for this question. Innovation for you. Paul, what is the role of innovation and
politics?
Stakeholders for you?
Okay.
So, Martin, you start.
Okay. Stakeholders, yeah.
Stakeholders, investors.
Yeah, no. We discussed it a little bit yesterday, no? I think that, and I've been part of more of these kind of meetings over the past couple of years. And every time I went to a meeting like this, I met so many interesting people, so many great ideas. But then the follow-up of those meetings is limited. So there are so many stakeholders here, and I feel that the connection of people need to be better after meetings, so that in fact we can actually work together in an informal way. And that comes back a bit what you were saying with citizens. We're all citizens, we all can contribute. And the idea is that if you can only contribute, like I'm a professor at Hopkins, so I can only contribute as Professor Hopkins? No, of course not. I'm Martin Bloem. I'm a citizen of the world. So I would love to connect with more people so that they can use my knowledge and I can learn from other people so that in fact my work will be better and their work will be better. So instead of only having meetings, that's not enough. You need absolutely platforms where people can connect in a very easy way, like not too big, because the moment to become too big, then in fact it takes you too much time. It has to be simple. But we have technology that we can simplify this.
You're stealing his seconds.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so for me, when we think about innovation, we have to think about for who. Are we innovating just for elites? Are we innovating for everyone? How is the innovation going to drive forward change? If we need solutions for everyone, even if you start with elites, how are you then going to take that through? How do you bring that and make that more accessible and affordable? So for me, looking at solutions and innovation, we need to think about where are those ways where there's universality, where we can start to actually spread. An example we've been working on is we've brought together a coalition of over 100 organizations to look at how do we double the consumption of beans, peas, and lentils. You can innovate in so many ways using that broad family. And in Spain, you obviously integrate them in a very big way into culture, into society, into food systems. In other parts of the world, they're seen as cheap food. They're seen as something that's not celebrated. How do we bring that out? How do we highlight that? How do we showcase that? So to me, innovation plays a key role, but we have to think about where are the spheres we're pivoting around, who is it for, and how do we make it accessible? Under time. There.
Okay, so you have let me a few seconds for me to finish this table. Thank you both. Bea has mentioned Marie Curie, and I would like to also mention a very good writer and professor in Spain that is called Miguel de Unamuno, who said, "A utopia is an utopia just until 5 people think it is possible. Then it becomes a possibility." Yeah. Today's utopias can be tomorrow's reality if we really fight for them. So
that's excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Bea.
Thank you very much.
Really good. I think it's good. No?
Good.
Awesome.